Welcome, everybody. Today we have an amazing speaker. Kelly's here, and she's going to chat with us. And I'm going to hand over the floor to Kelly now.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Awesome. I was just getting all of my slides going. Okay, let's see. I'm getting my dog to sit down. All right. Usually do this from my office, but we also got hit with snow, so I am working from home. All right. So let's see. All right. So what Lauren asked me to come and talk to you all about today is how we find meaning in data for fundraising so that we can make better decisions. And so you can tell me either you can come off mute or tell me in the chat. But are did you get a chance to look over the stuff I pre-sent to Lauren and do any donor data polls or anything like that? Anybody? Okay, if you didn't. All right. So if you did, we'll have some work we can do together. If not, just follow along and then you can go back and try some of this on your own later. Um, but basically today we're going to talk about how to use our donor data to make better decisions. And my dog is going to get put in timeout pretty soon. All right. So, yeah. So give me 1 minute. I'm going to get her something to distract her and I will be right back. Sorry, everybody. Not usually how this goes. Lois has been in my group coaching program and she can tell you I've never had the dog interrupt me before, so I'll be right back.
Well, Kelly's attending to the little puppy there. Anybody have any announcements they'd like to share?
We're finally ready to switch from eTapestry as a donor database. I
That
forget who I
deserves
was speaking to, but they said eTapestry still exists.
that deserves a party, Caitlin.
I think it does. It'll be a weird party of mainly everyone in this group, but because you'll get it.
So, what's your choice? What have you decided?
Undecided, but this group met and talked about databases. I'll just say that was very helpful. So looking into Bloomerang, but more to come. Sorry,
Oh,
Kelly, we were just talking about database.
No, I was hearing you the whole time. I was just getting my dog something to chew on, so she stopped trying to tear up the carpet next to me. If you like eTapestry, you'll like Bloomerang. It was founded by the same person. Um,
Good to know.
so yes. So anyway, I like Bloomerang. It's a good outlet. If you want some other recommendations, my other favorites are Neon and Donor Box. So just so you know. Yeah.
Thank you for those.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let me restart this now that the dog is not barking at me. So I'm Kelly. I have been in nonprofit fundraising for 15 years, and I like to say my claim to fame is I got into individual giving very early on in my career and really specialized into that. And I have spent 17 years now in the nonprofit industry, and I have never written a grant because I have been so in the weeds on individual giving that I have never done grant type fundraising. So that's when I say I'm very, very focused on individual giving. I have spent 17 years in individual giving. And yeah, so I started my first job. I grew individual giving income by about 300% in 3 years, growing the organization from 300,000 to 1 million in just those 3 years. And then later on, I did a couple other stints as development directors, but then I started working with a friend's 2-year-old organization. We raised $350,000 in a capital campaign to rescue an art house cinema in about 6 months from zero, more or less zero donor base. So that was one of the many things that taught me how to do individual giving. And I founded From Scratch Fundraising because I realized there was kind of a niche in need of a little more attention, which was how do you actually start individual giving programs when you have none to speak of? So most of my clients are organizations that have primarily been grant funded, historically contract funded, or have been for whatever reason, just not making any traction on individual giving. So that is what I do at From Scratch Fundraising. I also have a podcast. It's called Fridays for Fundraising. And it's a very short, under 10 minutes, most of the time under 5 minutes podcast, where I just share one thing you can be doing to move your fundraising forward. Yeah. Awesome. But today we're going to talk about data for decision making. And Caitlin, if you're, or Kate, I don't see an L in your name. Caitlin?
Major typo. I'm Caitlin.
Okay. I was like, oh, wait a minute. There's not an L there. All right. So, as you're pulling your data for your donor database, this is actually probably going to be a really helpful exercise for you to see and maybe even catch errors in your database as you are going through the process of migrating databases. Um, but essentially, where I like to start is pulling kind of a year by year analysis of our individual giving base. So, where I like to start is, and I sent a template of this to Lauren that I think she was sharing with you all. But where I like to start is just literally all of our donors' names here, and then their total giving every year for the past 5 years. So just arranging this chart, that alone is a really helpful exercise because I like to say, if you can't even do this, maybe we need to revisit our CRM and think about a new CRM because this should be really easy. In a lot of more forward-looking CRMs, this is a really easy report to pull. So if this is hard and makes you want to, beat your head against a wall, that might be an interesting sign that your donor CRM needs a rethink. But essentially, this is where we want to start because 5 years of giving data helps us see trend lines. If you have more data than this, if you have more years of data, you can certainly go back, and the more years you assess, the more kind of longevity and understanding of long-term trends you're going to have. But you can also just start with 5 years. Less than 5 years, you're going to just get less reliable data because, we really have to pull 5 years to get 4 years worth of kind of growth data. And then the changes between that growth, we need 3 years of data. So it takes 3 years, 3 data points to make a trend line, right? So that's why I say like kind of a 5 year minimum. But if you have more years than that, don't stop yourself at 5 years. I've done, I think the longest analysis I did like 15 years of data for a client once, which was maybe overkill. But it's always interesting to see that over time, right? 5 years is kind of a minimum. 10 years, I would say, is kind of an outer limit to be helpful. Though I think that is changing a little bit. It's interesting when I have clients where I can pull information pre-COVID for a few years just to see like what were the trends before COVID, what happened during the COVID years, and what's happened since then. It's kind of an interesting trend because everybody's fundraising blew up in some sort of way over the COVID years. So it's always interesting to see like before and after if you have that many years of reliable data. The first thing I do when I am looking at donor data is I actually color code it. So for those of you who didn't love math class, we can just color code and see some trends and draw enough conclusions from there that we're still getting good data without having to do any math whatsoever. So this is my favorite, and we're just going to put tiny rainbows on everything and it'll look really pretty. And I was telling Lauren when we were prepping for this session, it's just like we just put colors everywhere. It's a very colorful spreadsheet, and then the spreadsheets seem a lot less intimidating once they're paint by numbers. So let me just define some of this terminology that I use because these are some of the donor behaviors that I find helpful to track. So I'm actually going to start down here with new donor. So a new donor, I think we all know that's a donor who gave for the first time to your organization in the year that you're assessing, right? So that's what we're going to color gray. Then the next color up, we've got recaptured. So this is a donor who gave, stopped giving, and came back to you. So in the year that they came back to you, we're going to call them a recapture donor. The blue is going to be an upgrade. So anybody who gives more in the year you're assessing than they did the year before. A renewed donor is somebody who gave the same amount as they did the year before. A downgrade is going to be a donor who gave less than they gave the year before. And then lapse is going to be a donor that gave in the year prior and not in the year that you're assessing. So that's a lapse donor. Kathy, you're going to come here now. Come here. Or be quiet. One of the two. A lost donor is a donor that lapsed, and then in the following year they become a lost donor because they didn't come back. And one of the things we know from kind of big industry trends is that a lapsed donor is less likely to come. Sorry, a lost donor is less likely to come back after they have been lost. So what we can do is with lapsed donors, we can tend to recapture them. But once they've been gone for more than 2 years, they tend to be more or less like a new donor in terms of the level of work you have to do to bring them back into the fold, which is why I assess them slightly different.
So
Any
can I ask a
questions?
question?
Yeah, of course.
So what then would be considered a lie bunt and which would be considered a side bunt?
So your lapsed donors would be your lie bunt list,
Okay.
and your side bunt would be the lost donors.
Your silence would be the okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Yeah, I work with so many people just starting individual giving that like side bunt and lie bunt are terms they don't even know. So I like to
I
use
did
lapsed
not
and
know
lost.
them until several years ago. So
Yeah.
and people look at me like, what are you talking about?
Yes, exactly. So I really try to, because a lot of my audience are people who are just getting started with individual giving, I don't use a lot of industry terms. But yeah, lapsed donors would be the people who are showing up in your lie bunt because they gave last year, but unfortunately not this year. Your lost donors would be anybody who is in your side bunt, but not your lie bunt, right? Because lie bunt is people who lapsed last year. And so lost is anybody who lapsed in years prior.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Cool. So the first thing I do is then looking at 2021. I'll put it, that's the earliest year of data that I have to have 5 years of data starting right now. So I'll do it in descending order of gift size, right? This first year is not a year that you're going to color code because we don't have a prior year to compare it to. So whatever spread you pull, the first year of your data assessment is your baseline. Does that make sense to everybody? We're going to just start at a baseline that we can't color code this because otherwise I'd just color code them all as new donors, which is probably not what actually happened. So the first year that I can really assess is 2022. So again, I'm gonna put it in order, descending order of gift size, and then I'm going to then color code it. If you have a very small data set, you can kind of just eyeball it, right, and color code it. But if you have a larger data set, sometimes it's helpful just to like see the difference, find the difference between the gifts and use the difference to color code it. Other people know all these fancy like conditional formatting codes on Excel and everything. I've seen clients do it. You don't have to know how to do it, but if you do know how to do that conditional formatting, that will make it very, very easy. But otherwise, sometimes it's just helpful to eyeball it if you don't want to. Again, I'm trying to teach you a way to do it with zero math involved. So if you want to do it that way, you can just go line by line and color code it as, as eyeballing it, or you can kind of find the difference and see like anybody who gave less is either a lapsed or a downgrade. Anybody who gave more is an upgrade or a recapture, and then or a new donor, right? So we can kind of do some fast math there. Usually if I'm teaching this in a longer format, I actually pull up a spreadsheet and show you how to do all of that. But anyway, we're doing it a little faster than I usually do. So that's how we do that. And then we'll go to the next year, put it in descending order, and then we color code that year. And then we do it the next year and we color code that year, and then we color code our final year. Yeah. So by the time we've gone from 2021 up to 2025, you can actually already start to see some things going on in this data. So just based on this little snapshot that you see here, what do you see in just the color coding? Put it in the chat. You can unmute.
We need a plan for Toni Morrison.
We do indeed need
A
a
good
plan.
one.
Yes. Yeah, we need a plan for Toni. She is waving a flag
She's
saying,
literally the
"Notice
bluest
me."
eye.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that. That's so good. Yeah. Also, like we got a lot of yellows and oranges and reds in this year. We did something very wrong this year. Yeah. We got a lot of yellow and orange and red. Yeah. So that alone gives us a little bit of information. But then the color coding, the nice thing about color coding is then we can just count and find out what is happening in our donor behavior, right? So we can see a trend line through how many donors have we lost, have lapsed, have downgraded, upgraded. What are the general trends going on in our donor data right now, right? So the things we can learn just from color coding alone are just kind of those general trends, but also as Caitlin noticed, you can also really easily see like who's been upgrading, who's been downgrading, what donors have held steady, right? Like Victor Hugo, very steady, $500 donor every single year. At the same time, Maya Angelou here was giving 500, 500. We had this huge gift and then she went back down, right? That's another donor we need to have a conversation with, because if I don't understand why she downgraded, we need to have a conversation because she's super downgraded, right? And these are real data points. Obviously, these are not the donors, but these are real data points from a set of client data, right? So there's some scary movement here, right? We've got a couple $1,000 donors that lapse. That's not great, right? So looking at the individual donor level, we are already getting some ideas of who do we need to reach out to, all of that kind of stuff that I'm guessing you're not noticing day to day in your CRM, right? And I find there are so many donors like Toni Morrison who are giving just that little bit more, that they're saying, notice me. But because we're in our CRM juggling a ton of donors, we're not noticing them. And so that's part of why I like doing this color coding, is because this alone, shoots up some flares for some of our donors. But other things we can notice in the data is how many donors are coming back versus leaving? How many donors are upgrading versus downgrading, right? How are we doing on new donors? What percentage of our total donors are new to us and that kind of thing, right? So that color coding gives us that information, right? So in 2025, I had 13 donors downgrade and 20 donors upgrade. That's not too bad, right? I had 66 laps, but I recaptured 25. I mean, that could be a better number, but also it's not horrible, right? The prior year, 2024, we had 143 laps and only recaptured 26 and only brought in 27 new donors. So our donor total number plummeted that year, right? So that's very not good. We can also see over time, are more donors downgrading, upgrading over time, all of that kind of stuff, right? Any questions about that?
I'm saving my question for the end.
Okay.
I have a question for the adding up, how many numbers there are for each category. Are you suggesting that people do that like manually?
You can, so if you use Google Sheets or Excel, what you can do is actually turn on filters for each of the columns and then tell it, I only want to see the ones that are color coded red. And then you can highlight them all and do a count. You can either put an equation to count them, or in Google Sheets, if you highlight all of them, it'll give you a count at the bottom of the spreadsheets. And so, yeah, you don't actually have to manually count them.
Okay, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like a data person, so I know how to do all the fancy formulas you were talking about. So, like I look at this and I'm like, oh, this is the perfect time to use a pivot chart, things like that, where you don't have to do any back and forth plugging info in.
Yes, exactly. So if you know how to do all the fancy stuff, that's awesome. When I do this as a 2-hour workshop too, and then I teach all the fancy stuff in the CRM. But I find that that's a little too much if I don't have time to really dive deep in it, because people get really lost. So yeah. And it really, if you have a huge individual donor base, then yes, you need all of those formulas and stuff. But if your donor base is much smaller, it's actually, that's more work than just doing some formulas or just straight up counting it sometimes. So it really depends on the organization. Awesome. So then once I've done that color coding, then now we can do some math. So if you're like, hey, I don't like math, I'm out at this point, fine. You've got the color coding, you're going to learn plenty from color coding your data. But these standard statistics are some of the numbers that I've learned over time carry some meaning, and we can make decisions based on what we're seeing in the statistics. So average gift is exactly what it sounds like. What's the average gift size in your set? So this might not be the actual average gift size if a donor gives monthly, for example, right? But it's going to tell us the average amount that your donors are giving on an annualized basis, right? So that's what the average gift tells us. The median is the number in the middle of a data set, right? So a median is, if we list our donors from biggest to smallest gift that year, the median gift is the one that's going to be right in the middle. And then the mode gift is the number that's the most common in your data sets. So these are some statistics that I like looking at. And so how do I use these? Again, this is real client data. I'm switching it up between different clients to show you different segments of it so that, nothing gives anything away too much. But when we are looking at the average, median, and mode, these numbers kind of give us some information on their own, but also they tell us a story when we look at them overall, right? So a lot of the time what I find is we are only looking at the total number, right? And so we're looking here and we're saying total's going up, awesome, right? Happy. But that's not the whole story, right? What I've seen, and actually what's true of this specific donor, is while their total giving was growing over time, and this was an ED transition year, so a new executive director came in that year, so they did a little fumble there. But in what we're seeing in this specific client's donor data was actually a lot of instability in the top like major gifts levels. So their overall donor retention was not bad, but their donor retention at the major gifts level was really low. And I don't need to tell all of you that that's not good when you have a lot of turnover at your major gifts level. And how I was actually starting to see that was if we look at average gift size, it's floating all over the map. Right? It's 198, 216, 220, it dipped down again, and then the 207. But what I'm seeing is the median gift size is staying pretty stable, right? And so when I'm looking at a donor spread, when I'm working with a client on a strategy plan, I want to see average gift and median gift size kind of tracking together. If one goes up, I want to see them moving sort of in tandem or getting closer together. Yeah. Because that tells me there's some stability in their donor base. And the reason that that's something I know from just these statistics is most of our donor programs are going to be on a bell curve. Right? But it's going to be a kind of skewed bell curve towards the low end of giving, right? And so what I'm going to see is a median gift size and an average gift size that are, when they're trending together, that's telling me that the whole group is moving together, right? When I have an average gift size that's jumping around while median gift is staying stable, it's telling me that there's weird movements on one or the other side of my donor spread. And more often than not, it's going to be at the high end, right? More often than not, it's at the high end because I don't think we tend, one or two $5 donors leaving doesn't make a huge difference. One or two $5,000 donors, you see it in the average gift size. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So that's why I like looking at the average and median gift size kind of in tandem. How are they moving in tandem? Because when they move together, there's a certain amount of stability that we see in a program. The mode gift is the amount that shows up most consistently in your donor base. And what I like to say is this is worth calculating, just again, to see how stable it is. But also, this is a great number for you to use when you're doing generic asks, because this is your audience kind of telling you what their general capacity is. So if I was going to, do a generic post on social media to ask for money, this is the amounts I would probably ask for because it's the one that's showing up the most. Or I might go a little bit higher, trying to make my mode gift go up, right? So if most people are giving 35, I might ask for 50 just to try and push that mode gift up just a little bit, right? Does that make sense? So these are what these kind of standard statistic numbers would tell us. So within this total giving, which is growing, and that's really, really nice, the other numbers tell us a more grounded story, right? So we are getting more giving over time, but the fact that like our average gift size is going down is saying like, yes, we're growing, but we're not getting more major donors on the top, right? And that's literally, I pulled this, I saw that, and then I dove into their major gifts and just did an analysis on their major gifts level gifts. And that's when it was like, oh, actually, this program looks pretty stable overall and it's growing, but there's like the major gifts program is a disaster. And I pegged that just based on this data here. Yeah. Sweet. Any questions?
I'm just going to chime in with something that's rattling around my brain and we can save it for
Yeah.
later. But speaking of getting into the weeds, we at the Lake Apacon Foundation like to complicate things sometimes by defining like who a member is, what a donation is, and that can
Yes.
really throw off your data set. Like Toni
Mm-hmm.
Morrison's like bought a plant in the plant sale, then she bought a plant in the plant sale, the next year she bought a plant in the plant sale, but she's not becoming a member, and that's
Yes.
really where
Yes.
we're trying to develop. So I think it's individual to every group, but we struggle to agree on what the data set should be because
Yes.
it makes trending hard work when you're like, we don't really consider that membership. So I'm wondering, my question for
Yes.
later is, do you like to consider all giving? And I think that's the only way to really make these columns work anyways. Like just look at the dollars coming in from each person, no matter what it is.
Yeah. So here's yes and.
Okay.
Buying a plant at a plant sale is not a donation. It's
Mm.
not. It's earned income. It's not fundraising. It's
Mm.
not relationship based.
Mm.
And if she's not getting a plant at a plant sale, she's not coming back, so she's not a donor. That's
Mm-hmm.
how I define it.
Okay.
Right? Is if we're having to give away things to get donations, we're selling something.
Mm.
It's not a donation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely does.
Yeah, yeah. So what I would do is actually move all of those types of donations to a sales thing and see how you're doing once you remove all of those sales things, right? So this is something I talk about a lot in my group coaching program, and Lois is on here. Lois was in my group coaching program for a while. The when we're talking about individual giving, I'm talking about relationship-based fundraising. I want us to be building relationships based on the strength of our mission, right? If we're having to give things away, hand out tote bags, sell things, tickets to a gala, these are sales. Those are earned revenue. They're not fundraising. And so that's often what I see is people will sell something, or oh, we had an event last year and we sold, hundreds of tickets, and so we have hundreds of donors. No, you don't. You have hundreds of people who bought a ticket. And if you didn't put in the work to convert them and make them fall in love with your mission, then unless you have that event again, you're not bringing them back. And so that is something that often when I am starting to work with a client and they're coming to me with that, like, why isn't my fundraising growing? It's often down to that, right? Is we've been doing a lot of sales things or tickets or events that we're calling fundraising, but honestly should be considered a different part of the process. Yeah. Because we can build stability, we can build loyalty, we can do upgrades when people believe in the mission. But when it's just you throw a good party, it's different. Says the girl who used to raise close to $1 million at a gala. So, but it's the way I used our gala was to recruit people and get them inspired. And then I spent a lot of time after our gala building relationships with anybody new who showed up in the room. Right. And then that's how we grew our organization as rapidly as we did.
Okay. Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate that distinction a lot.
Yeah. Awesome. So then let's talk about total giving and how to calculate growth rate. So this is one that I find we don't actually look at enough, where it's just more, did the numbers go up? Did the numbers go down? Right. But we can't really predict future giving if we don't know what our growth rates are and what our average growth rate is, so that we can figure out if we're growing at a steady pace or not. And so the total giving, as you see here, and this is actually a reverse. This was the earliest year. This was the last year. So it's different than the other spreads that I did. But total giving, the way we calculate this is the total in year 2 minus the total in year 1 divided by the total in year 1. And you multiply that by 100, you get the percentage. So we can see this went down. It went down by -1%. Yeah. And then for this year, we're going to take year 2 minus year 1, divide it by year 1, and multiply that by 100. We get 18% growth. Yeah. So as you can see from this, this is really wildly unstable growth. We've got a negative year that's sort of negative, and then a big jump, huge jump, and then another kind of medium jump, right? So from this, there's not a lot of stability in our growth rate, right? It's highly dependent on what we did that year. So when we're seeing a growth rate that's fluctuating this big, and I've seen worse swings, then we're really, again, we're not dealing with a stable program. We're dealing with a program that is doing a lot of different things in a lot of different years. And when I see something like this, again, my main instinct is we need to build stability, right? We're growing at a decent clip. That's not a bad growth rate, not a bad growth amount. It's just the swings in the rate are not good. And it means we're probably highly dependent on 1 or 2 things that we're doing in these years that might have been special efforts in those years. Make sense? My clients often tell me it's spooky. I tell them not to tell me anything until I've done the data assessments. And then I go back and I say, oh, so you did something this year. Something happened this year. And they're like, how did you know? Because I'm really good at this. Because data actually tells you a story. Yeah, that was an anniversary year. That was a whatever, right? Yes. But what I want to see is like, okay, we had an anniversary year. Did we leverage it? And then did we make sure that translated into stability, new giving levels, multi-year gifts, right? That kind of thing. We don't want to blow an anniversary year on just fundraising for that year. We want to use it to like set up the next 10 years of our fundraising. Yeah. So anyway, it's always fun to see like how much I can figure out about a client before they tell me anything just from their data. It's the fun game I play because I'm a nerd. So anyway, that's our growth rate. Then the other kind of elephant in the room is our donor retention rates. And I know more and more databases are just telling you your donor retention rate when you log in, which is cool. And I'm for that. But also, most people still don't know what a donor retention rate is or how to calculate it if the database doesn't tell you, right? So essentially, what we're doing to calculate our donor retention rate is we're taking total donors in year 1, and we're subtracting the number of donors who lapse the following year. And then that gives us the number of donors who stayed with us, who didn't go away, right? And then we're going to divide that by, again, the total donors in this year, multiply that by 100, and that's your donor retention rates. I had a client once come to me and I said, what's your donor retention rate? They said 145. That's not possible. You can't retain more donors than you had. But it was because they were basically calculating it as we had 100 donors that year, we had 145 donors the next year. And so therefore we have 145% donor retention. And I was like, no, it's not absolute numbers. It is specific donor behavior, right? So as you can see, this year we had 86 total donors. This year, the organization had 108 total donors. That is not 100% donor retention, right? Because some of their donors lapsed. So they had 68% donor retention and also brought in new donors, right? That is how we grew. But we did lose donors, so we did not have 100% donor retention. Make sense? So more and more people are aware of how to calculate that now, which I'm excited to see, but I still run into people who don't know how that's calculated. Why is donor retention important? Because if we're not retaining a lot of our donors, we're just never going to reach a point of stability, right? So when there's a lot of donor churn, we don't reach a point of stability. And this is something, donor retention rate industry wide has hovered at 40% the entire 17 years I've been doing this. But I have seen clients with 12% donor retention. I have run programs with 85% donor retention, right? It's all over the map. But it's really, really important that we know our donor retention number. Is it trending up? Is it trending down? All of that kind of stuff is really critical for us to understand, because if you are not retaining a significant proportion of your donors, you have a stability problem, right? You're never gonna, it's why I tend to say it's why fundraising feels like a hustle, is because you're not keeping the donors you've already gained, right? I was approached by a client. I worked with them a couple years ago, and they came to me. They had a 12% donor retention rate. They were recruiting $100,000 in new giving every single year and retaining 12% of it, right? And so they came to me and they were like, we can't seem to grow. How do we get more new donors? And I said, new donors is not your problem. You're doing great with new donors. Your problem is you're not keeping them. And the good news is we just need to put together a decent stewardship program and you will keep those donors, right? So I worked with them to put together a stewardship program. The next year they had 68% donor retention, right? It is not hard to move the needle on your donor retention rates. You just have to actually be attentive to it. Make sense? And it's way easier to keep a donor that you have than to bring in $100,000 worth of new donors, I promise. Yeah, Julia.
Do you have suggestions on how to find, like good industry benchmarks for retention rates? Because I've been trying to, look that up and getting like a lot of different numbers when I Google.
Yeah, the source I tend to use is the Fundraising Efficiency Project, FEP. It's run as a partnership of, I think, NEON, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and one other group. It's a really great resource. They do quarterly benchmarks, they do annual benchmarks, all of that kind of stuff. So they're a great resource. Yeah. And Caitlin, you said, can you share one thing that I incorporated into the stewardship program? If you don't do it already, call your donors. That's it's so funny on the speaker circuit. I speak at a lot of conferences, and somebody was moderating who had seen me speak a number of times, and somebody asked that very question, and she was like, I know what Kelly's going to say. She's going to say, call your donors. So call your donors. Tell them thank you. Call them on a regular basis to give them updates. Not just to solicit, but just to say thank you and stay in touch with them. It actually really, really works. Even if you're leaving voicemails, right? Yeah. Lisa, Pixar. Yeah. So doing that, calling people to thank them right after their gift. I just really, actually, what I tend to say is, like, think about how you let the donors see how the sausage is made, right? I think a lot of the time we want to keep donors at arm's length and show them the pretty picture of our organization. But what I have found is the more you let donors in, the more engaged, the more dedicated they get to your organization, because you feel real, right? They see the work behind the scenes. They get to know your staff members. All of this kind of stuff is really, really helpful to donors. So that would be the other thing, is how do you let the donor in so that they can see behind the scenes and they feel like a partner. I often tell my clients, like, don't make the donor the hero, make them the partner. Make them a partner, not a hero. Nobody wants to save your organization. Nobody wants that responsibility on their shoulders, right? So what we want to do is we want to make our donors feel like partners, like they understand what the mission is, what we're doing, how we're using the funding, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. All right. So the other things I like to look at, again, this is just looking at donor behavior, is downgrades versus upgrades. How are we doing there? If we are if we're kind of growing, but we're frustrated by how slowly we're growing, we have a semi-decent donor retention rate, the next thing you want to look at is your downgrades versus upgrades. This is what I kind of tend to call the canary in a coal mine statistic is your donors might not be leaving you, but they're giving less and less. This is something I've also seen in programs where we're struggling with donor retention, but for whatever reason, our donors feel kind of loyal. So they're not leaving, but they're giving less and less over time. This is something that we want to be able to see, right? So if you're feeling like, gosh, I just can't get ahead, our growth rates are okay, our average gift size is okay, our donor retention rate is okay, the next thing I would look at is your downgrades versus upgrades. Is if your donors are downgrading in greater and greater numbers, and especially downgrading as a bigger and bigger percentage of your total donor base, that's a similar retention problem. It's a retention problem waiting to happen. That makes sense. Yeah. And then the last thing I like to look at is new donors. What are new donors as a percentage of our base, right? If we're really humming on like just tons of new donors, but our donor retention rate is bad, right? Again, that's new donors aren't going to save you. New donors are the hardest to retain, right? From a first gift to a second gift, that is the hardest jump. That is the hardest donor to retain. Once they make a second gift, it's significantly more likely they will become an ongoing donor. And so what I tend to see is if we've got poor retention rates and we're getting a huge percentage of our donors from new donors, we definitely want to invest in stewardship, and we especially want to invest in a stewardship program that is particularly welcoming for new donors. Yeah, that's something I'm working on right now with a client. They're a newer organization, so it makes sense that a lot of their donor base is new. But it's also when we look, almost all of their lapsed donors the prior year were their new donors the year before that, right? And so what we're trying to do is build up a specific stewardship strategy around new donors. Yeah. All right. And so what I would say is the reason we want to dive into this is too often we base our fundraising targets on what the organization needs or wants, right? And I have pictures of cranky toddlers because that's what it feels like sometimes to us development directors, right? It's just like, but I want a new whatever program staffer. We're like, yeah, but the data's not there to support a sustainable salary for that person, right? So this is why it's really, really important that we do these data analyses, because otherwise we're just kind of guessing at what we can fundraise the next year, right? It's why so many fundraising professionals burn out, is because targets are being set based on what the organization needs and nothing rooted in any type of reality based on the donor base we already have, right? When we're doing these data analyses and seeing where the problems are and seeing what can change, right? We're basing our fundraising targets on what's realistic, right? Not just what our organization, is demanding, right? Like these cranky toddlers, right? And really, it's because if we want massive growth, like we have to invest in it, right? Not just hope for it. That's what I always saw, right? Is that, and I'm sure some of you can relate to this, right? It's just, well, we want you to triple the individual giving revenue this year. How in the world am I going to do that, right? But okay, cool. Can I buy this CRM that's going to help me do that better? No. Okay, well, guess we're not tripling our revenue, right? Because we can't grow if we're not making strategic investments in that growth, right? We can't solve a problem that we don't know we have, right? And so that's why these data analyses are really, really important, because it lets you see where your strengths are, see where your weaknesses are, and make a plan to mitigate that, right? So let me just do a little bit of like, okay, what does it all mean, right? We talked about a lot of statistics and how to calculate things, but like, what does it mean and what would I do if I see different data things happening, right? If you have a low donor retention rate, your focus needs to be on stewardship, right? And this is something I often will say is, if your donor retention rate is under 50%, stop looking for new donors. Just stop. People like freak out when I say that, but stop looking for new donors. If your donor retention is under 50%, stop looking for new donors. What we want to do is fix our stewardship program. We want to keep the donors that we have before we go find new donors, right? We want to have a strategy to keep people, because otherwise we're going to keep acquisitioning new donors in the ways that are the most expensive, right? We get new donors how? Events, ads, outreach things that are really expensive, right? So if you have low donor retention, your stewardship program needs work, right? If you have a large lapsed donor population, running a LIBUNT or donor reactivation campaign can be a really good strategy. And then the other thing is look at your major gifts levels. How stable is that? Run this same analysis on your major donors. What does it look like? Does it trend the same as our general donor trends? Is it better? Is it worse? Right? Like I said, I had a client that their overall numbers, the averages, I was like, uh-oh, something's happening in the major gifts level. When I ran that on the major gifts level, it was a tragedy. Right? The rest of their numbers were great. The major gifts levels were awful. There was so much turnover. There was such low retention in their major gifts strategy, right? So if you have high turnover there, we need a formal major gifts plan. And similarly, if we have higher downgrades versus upgrades, we want to work on stewardship and intentional solicitation plans to start moving like mid-level donors up, right? Or stabilizing those donors that upgrade, downgrade, right? Those donors. We want to stop that yo-yoing with our donor base, right? However, if you have decent donor retention, just low new donor percentages, then we want to focus on lead generation, bringing in new donors, getting more people on our email list. Okay. If your donor retention is high, that means your stewardship is good. You can hold steady there, right? Once your donor retention rates are 50 or 60%, that's when I say this is a great time to launch monthly giving or multi-year major gifts asks, right? Again, if your donor retention number is low, I hear a lot of people say, oh, that's the time to run monthly giving. Monthly giving will fix your stewardship program. No, it won't, because nobody will sign up for it. Yes? Because when people sign up for monthly giving, it's a set it and forget it, right? The donor forgets, you forget, donors then. I had this happen recently. I set up a monthly gift. I heard nothing from the organization, so I went in and canceled because I was like, I've gotten less than 0 things from you. So like, I'm done because I set it and forget it, and you forgot about me too, right? So if your donors if you're already struggling with that donor retention, that's not the time to launch monthly giving, right? Because donors know that if they give you monthly, they're never going to hear from you again, right? So what I tend to say is like fix stewardship. And then when your donor retention numbers are good, then try deploying a monthly giving program, because then it's going to lock it in. It's going to help it get even higher, right? Or that's a great time to deploy those multi-year major gift asks, right? Would you give us $5,000 a year for 5 years? That's $25,000, right? Can you make a commitment to that size gift? And if donors are regularly upgrading unasked, that's usually a sign to me that an intentional solicitation plan and a more formal major gifts program will actually really skyrocket a program, right? I had a client that she was just like, oh yeah, this $5,000 gift came in. And I was like, oh, from who? She's like, I don't know. I've never met him. It's like, whoa, okay, let's get to know that person, because if they are writing a $5,000 check unasked, they can probably do $50,000 once you steward them well, right? So if you're seeing lots of upgrades without you having to put a lot of intentional work into it, building some intentionality means a little bit will go a long way for your organization, right? Another thing that I see is if you were looking at specific revenue and campaign performance, if you're seeing a decline in average gift size, something to try in your campaigns is giving suggested gift amounts tied to impact, right? This can be a really helpful strategy. We call them giving chains sometimes, or ask chains. Or a monthly giving strategy can sometimes shore that up if your retention is otherwise okay. The other thing is if a single campaign in your portfolio is 40% or more of your annual revenue, we're going to want to diversify that because we are way too reliant on one campaign, one event, one specific thing, right? And then, yeah, I would say also more and more I'm seeing this is event revenue is declining for a lot of organizations because people are just not into galas anymore or what have you. And so that's really, I really am encouraging people to really rethink the value of events because yeah, they gotta show results. Not just, hey, it's a nice event and we had fun and everybody felt good, but like, are we getting our money's worth? Is the ROI on this worth it? Yeah. Julia, do you have a question?
I have a question about the suggested gift amounts. So, you know, I worked at a place where we always included sorry, it's loud here. Specific ask amounts.
Yeah.
And then, but then I learned that might not be as standard as I thought. So, do you suggest this like only when, you know, we're seeing like a downgrade pattern? Because I thought it like helps the donors, you know, not have to look up how much they gave, and they can just, it like lowers that barrier to just go ahead and write the check. But then it can also set like a ceiling of how much we're expecting from them. So there's kind of two ways to look at it.
I think that's why I tend to shy away from them unless I'm seeing like declining average gift sizes, is because they do kind of cap it, and I don't want to peg at a low number. I want people to kind of go high. Like what we do know is people tend to stick with the first number that's realistic to them. So it's an argument for like your donation page going from biggest to smallest gift size that you're suggesting instead of the other way around. Because if I'm looking at like 25, 50, 100, oh, I got to 100 and I stopped, right? But if we're looking at a spread that's 500, 250, oh, I can do 250 and I stop there, I don't keep going down to 100, right? So I'm really a big believer in it. It depends. It depends on the context. It depends on what's happening in your donor base. I think they can be really helpful if you're trying to pull up a average gift size. I think if you have better ways of asking and your donors are giving a good amount, it can actually pull it down. Which is something I actually discovered this at we were doing an anniversary event for an organization I worked for, and we did a pay your own ticket price, like pick your own, and we picked different random silly numbers that had something to do with our organization. So the building was built in 1937, so $19.37 was one ticket size, and then another ticket size was 75 because it was our 75th anniversary. And so we just picked a bunch of like numbers like that were kind of random but relevant to our organization. And if we had, like, we were originally planning to sell tickets for $40, but then after we did the choose your own ticket size, we ended up, I think the average ticket sale once we did the spread and let everybody pick their own was like $75, which is way higher than we would have actually pegged it. So that was an interesting learning for me. It was doing that kind of bigger, higher spread than we thought we could get people to pay for the events. So I would say experiment with it and track, see what happens.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I could stay here all day and talk nerdy data things, but but our hour is up, so I should probably head out. But I did talk to Lauren about letting you all know kind of how to talk to me if you want more help with this. if you want to follow up or ask more questions, you can email me. My email address is on the next slide. I can do one-on-one strategy calls if you are interested. I also, Lois had to go, but Lois is part of my Sustain and Thrive program, which is a year-long course where you learn. Basically, we just go through all the pillars. It's fundraising, individual giving 101, which I find a lot of times right now we're really interested in all the flashy, cool things you can do with fundraising. But a lot of organizations are still getting the basics wrong. So Sustain and Thrive is really about that. It's about getting the underlying fundraising program going so that there's a lot of stability, so that when you do try the flashy, cool new things that are out there, which you should totally try out, they're going to have a greater impact and lend more sustainability to your organization. And then I also come in as a consultant to do strategy plans and build individual giving programs for organizations. So if you are interested in getting in touch with me, that QR code leads you to my email subscription page. And then my email is kelly@fromscratchfundraising.com. And so if you have any other questions, you can always shoot me an email there. But just wanted to race through that. I can hang out and answer questions if there's more time, but also I know it's 4 after 4. So if you have other things to do, that's totally cool.
Kelly, with many of our organizations involved in policy, and you have quite an extensive background in that, did you want to just kind of share some thoughts on some things there?
Yeah, sure. And if there were things we talked about that you want me to hit on, Lauren, just remind me. But yeah, I spent the better part of my 17 years in fundraising working in really niche policy work. I was in I started my career at an organization doing US foreign policy towards Latin America in DC. And then, sorry, the mailman is here. Cassie, honey, here, come here. It's okay. All right. I will talk over her. So I started doing US foreign policy and fundraising around US foreign policy, which if you want niche, fundraise around US foreign policy. It's a lot of fun. It's quite a challenge. And then I did work for a regional climate advocacy organization doing policy work in Maryland, DC, and Virginia at the state and local level. And so, yeah, policy is an interesting monster when it comes to fundraising because we don't have those direct support metrics, right? Those impact we fed 5 families, we fed 20 families with your donation, that kind of stuff. We don't have those easy metrics. And in fact, it's even harder, right? Because you can be doing lots and lots of really great work, and then there's an election, and the politicians you're advocating towards change, and you have to start all over again, right? And so policy is a really interesting niche to fundraise in, but it's actually one of my favorites because I think it takes a lot more creativity and honestly a lot more attentiveness to the relationships that you're building, which I think actually makes it a really magical area to fundraise for. But some of the things that I found that were particularly important for advocacy was really helping your donors understand the policy process, right? And this is where the civic engagement grassroots organizer nerd that I was before I became a fundraiser really gets activated because what I found really works with policy advocacy and especially environmental advocacy is helping your donors understand the process, right? How does a bill become law? What are the politics? What are the issues involved? What is the give and take when you are doing policy work, right? And that is not something that's easy to message. But it's also something that nobody wants to engage with. The wonkier you talk about it, the harder you make it sound, the less donors want to engage with it, right? And so I always found my role as a fundraiser for a policy organization was actually really, I like to say I was the biggest policy nerd on staff, because I wasn't just learning the policy that we were doing. I was trying to figure out how to talk about the policy and that really nuanced niche work that we were doing in a way that was easy for our donors to understand. And honestly, the best way to fundraise in that context is lots and lots of communication with your donors, lots and lots of events, not events, but like conversations. It has to be conversation based, it has to be relationship based, because the donors don't see the progress all the time, right? The donors aren't going to those meetings with your local legislators, right? They're not seeing that. But for a lot of organizations, they're not. For organizations that I worked for, sometimes we would take donors along on those meetings, right? And it's like, you're not going to understand anything, and we just want you to sit in a room and watch, right? But bringing the donors along to those policy meetings was really, really powerful, especially with our major donors, right? And so I didn't actually tell you this story, Lauren, but one of the moments I really knew that what we were building at the first organization I worked for, when I was like, oh, this is working, like this is really, really working, was we had raised a ton of money, a ton of money on this specific policy that we were advocating for. And we were getting beat bad. It was not pretty. It was just, doors were slamming in our face. It was, I mean, those of you who work for policy organizations, it was just one of those that like, we're climbing uphill while sinking in the mud, right? And it was awful. And at one point we were like, okay, it's time for our own annual donor meeting where we talk to our donors about what we're doing, right? We just had this moment of like, my executive director was like, Kelly, what do we do? We can tell them what's going on. We can tell them how bad we're losing. And it's like, I actually think we can. I think we should. I think we should be totally open. I think we should tell them what we've tried, what's working, what's not, why it's not working. We need to take them on a journey with us and help them understand why we're getting beat so bad. And she's like, okay, like I've trusted you this far. You've tripled our income. Like, all right. But on your head be it. Like, you're fired if this doesn't work. I was like, great. I believe in it. I believe in us. We can do this. And so we did. We sat down with the donors and we were just really, really brutally honest about like, this is what we're trying. These are the walls we're hitting. This is why we can't move it. These politicians won't meet with us. This is what's happening here. And we opened it up to a Q&A after we presented it all. And the first question was, how much more money do you guys need? I'm not kidding, right? It was incredible, right? And I just had this moment of like, oh, we're doing something magic here, when we just said, hey, you guys gave us hundreds of thousands of dollars and we blew it, right? To have the first question be, how much more money do you need, was incredible, right? And that's what our donors were asking was, okay, why can't you get in with that politician? Well, I know a friend who's a big donor. Like, let me call that friend. Explain to me what you need. Can I, bring you to a lunch with this friend who's a major donor? Maybe we can work on a strategy, get that politician to open that door, right? It was really amazing. And that would not have happened if we hadn't been honest, right? And actually what came out of that donor meeting not only was more funding, but yeah, it was donors taking an active role in helping us work to change that policy. And that would not have happened if we hadn't made it easy for them to digest, hadn't made it easy for them to see what we were doing, if we hadn't built an organization around transparency and trust with our donors. And it certainly wouldn't have happened if we lied to them and said everything was coming up roses, right? And so it's a really interesting story, because when people say, oh, I couldn't possibly tell our donors about these setbacks, I can tell you about a couple $100,000 setback that the donors were really kind about because we were able to take them on the whole journey with us. So when we keep donors at arm's length, that just doesn't work for policy organizations. Yeah. Is that kind of what you wanted me to talk about, Lauren?
That was wonderful. So appreciate that. Absolutely. Well, as you mentioned, Kelly, we're going over time, and for those who are with us, thank you so much. This is recorded, so you can go back at any moment that you'd like to review. And for those who couldn't make it, totally understand. With that, we'll close off, and everybody enjoy. We'll all be shoveling for a while. Get your cardio in. We'll see you next month.
Bye, everybody.